I was standing at my kitchen counter on December 23rd, folding dish towels that didn't need folding, when my daughter-in-law called. Her voice had that careful brightness people use when they're about to say something that will hurt you, but want to pretend it won't. "Mom," she said she'd called me. "Mom, for 18 years, we've been talking. And we think it might be better if you didn't come for Christmas this year. The house is just so chaotic with the kids, and Rob's been under so much stress with the business, and we just need it to be really low-key. Just us. You understand, don't you?" I looked out my kitchen window at Mrs. Patterson's bird feeder across the fence, at the chickadees picking at the seeds. The feeder was one of those wooden ones, painted red, with a little pitched roof like a miniature barn. Tom had helped her husband build it years ago, back when both men were still alive, still climbing ladders and using power tools and thinking they had all the time in the world. "Of course," I heard myself say. "Whatever you need." "You're the best," she said, relief flooding her voice like water breaking through a dam. "We'll do something after New Year's, okay? Love you." The line went quiet before I could answer. Not even long enough for me to say I loved her too. I stood there with the phone still in my hand, the dish towel hanging limp over the counter edge. Through the window, the December afternoon light was already going gray. That flat, colorless gray that winter afternoons get around 4 o'clock, when the sun is still technically up, but all the warmth has gone out of it. I'd bought the grandchildren's presents 2 months ago, back in October when the stores first started putting out their Christmas displays. They were wrapped and stacked in my spare bedroom, organized by child, by age appropriateness. I'd made lists. I'd checked them twice, actually, because I'm that kind of person. I'd been planning the cookies I'd bake on Christmas Eve, the ones I always made. The ones my mother taught me to make 63 years ago when I was 11 years old and standing on a step stool in her kitchen, watching her hands work the dough. I set the phone down very carefully, the way you handle something fragile that you're afraid might break if you're not gentle enough. My husband Tom had been gone for 7 years. 7 years, 2 months, and 16 days, if I'm being precise, and some days I still counted. We'd always hosted Christmas when the kids were young, back when the kids meant Rob and his sister Claire, before Claire moved to Oregon with her family, and visits became once a year if we were lucky. Our house had been the gathering place, the anchor point. The tree in the living room corner by the window. The stockings hanging from the mantel that Tom built the second year we owned this house. The smell of cinnamon rolls on Christmas morning, turkey in the afternoon, pies cooling on every available surface. After he died, Rob and Jennifer took over hosting, and I was grateful. I brought pies always pumpkin and always apple, because those were the ones people actually ate, and I helped with dishes and played board games with the grandchildren on the living room floor until my knees protested and I had to haul myself up, using the coffee table for leverage. That was my place now. That was what I did. I was the grandmother who showed up and helped and didn't make a fuss and went home at the end of the evening to her quiet house. I sat down at the kitchen table, in the chair that faced the backyard. Tom's chair had been the one facing the kitchen, because he liked to watch me cook, liked to talk to me while I moved around preparing meals. I'd taken the other chair after he died, partly because I couldn't bear to look at his empty seat, and partly because I found I liked looking out at the yard, at the bird feeder, at the fence line where the lilac bushes grew thick and purple every May. The yard needed raking still. The leaves from the oak tree in the corner had mostly fallen, creating a thick brown carpet across the grass. I'd been putting it off for weeks now, telling myself I'd get to it, that I should just do it myself, that I was capable. Mrs. Patterson's son usually did it for $20, and his boy must be 14 now, 15 maybe, did the snow shoveling in the winter. But I kept thinking I should do it myself, that I was only 74, that I shouldn't need help for every little thing, that asking for help was admitting something I wasn't ready to admit. The quiet in my house suddenly felt very loud. It's strange how that works. Silence has a sound to it, a presence. You notice it most when you're forced to sit in it, when there's no distraction, no task to complete, no person to talk to. Just you and the silence and whatever thoughts you've been avoiding. I want to be clear about something. I wasn't angry, not right then. I was something else. Something that didn't have a name yet, or if it did, I hadn't learned the word for it. It felt like standing on ground I thought was solid and feeling it shift just slightly under my feet. Not enough to knock you down. Just enough to make you wonder what else might move if you weren't careful, what else you'd been taking for granted that could disappear with a single phone call. I got up and made myself a cup of tea, even though I didn't want tea. It was just something to do. Something to make the next 5 minutes have a shape, a purpose. I filled the kettle. I turned on the burner. I got down a mug from the cabinet, the blue one with the chipped handle that I'd been meaning to replace for 3 years. I found a tea bag Earl Grey, which Tom had always said tasted like perfume, but which I'd always loved. I waited for the water to boil, listening to the quiet hiss and rumble as it heated. When the tea was ready, I sat back down at the table and wrapped my hands around the mug, letting the warmth seep into my palms. Outside, a cardinal landed on the fence post, bright red against the gray afternoon. Tom had loved cardinals. He'd always said they were good luck, though I don't know where he got that idea. Maybe from his mother, or maybe he just made it up because he liked the way they looked. I sipped my tea and tried to understand what had just happened, tried to make sense of the feeling in my chest that wasn't quite pain, but wasn't quite anything else either. They didn't want me for Christmas. My son and his wife, the mother of my grandchildren, the people I'd helped and supported and loved for decades, they didn't want me there. And the worst part, the part that made my throat tight, was how easy it had been for them to say it. How Jennifer's voice had been so light, so casual, as if she were telling me about a change in dinner plans, not uninviting me from the most important family gathering of the year. The next morning was Christmas Eve. I woke up early the way I always did. That internal clock that never learned retirement. Never adjusted to the fact that I didn't have to be anywhere or do anything on anyone else's schedule anymore. The house was cold. The furnace was set to 68, which Tom had always said was perfectly reasonable, but somehow the cold seemed to seep in anyway, especially on winter mornings when the sun hadn't cleared the roofline yet. I wrapped my robe tighter around myself and padded down the hallway to the kitchen. The floorboards creaked in the same spots they'd creaked for 30 years. Third board from the bedroom door. The one right at the entrance to the kitchen. Little sounds that meant home, that meant familiar, that meant this is your place in the world. I started the coffee maker and opened the pantry to get the filters. That's when I saw them, all the baking supplies I'd bought 3 weeks ago. The chocolate chips for the thumbprint cookies. The colored sugars for the cutouts. The almond extract for the spritz cookies. That came out of the old cookie press Tom had bought me for Christmas in 1982. The one that was shaped like a gun and you loaded the dough into and squeezed the trigger and perfect little ridged cookies came out the front. I stood there looking at those supplies, the unopened bags, the full bottles, and something shifted in me. Not a dramatic shift. Not a moment of clarity or a sudden decision. Just a small, quiet recognition that I'd been preparing for something that wasn't going to happen. That I'd been building toward a moment that had been taken away. And now I had to figure out what to do with all that preparation, all that expectation. I closed the pantry door. I went back to the counter, poured myself a cup of coffee, and stood at the sink looking out the window while I drank it. Mrs. Patterson's house was dark still. She was usually up by now. She was even more of an early riser than I was, but maybe she was sleeping in. Maybe at 81 you earn the right to sleep past 6 in the morning on a Saturday. When I'd finished my coffee, I picked up the phone and called my friend Margaret. Margaret and I had known each other for almost 50 years. Our boys had played Little League together, been in Scouts together, gone to the same high school. Her husband Frank had died 9 years ago, 2 years before Tom. We'd been widows together, learning the strange new language of alone. "Do you want company for Christmas?" I asked when she answered. No preamble, no small talk. Margaret and I had passed the point of needing those things years ago. There was a pause. Then, what happened? They asked me not to come. Another pause, longer this time. Rob and Jennifer? Yes, oh honey. Her voice was soft, careful. Of course you can come here. Come for dinner tomorrow. 2 o'clock. Bring nothing. I mean it. I'll bring wine, I said. Stubborn woman. Takes one to know one. After I hung up, I felt fractionally better. Not good, but better. At least I wouldn't spend Christmas alone. At least there was a plan, something to move toward. I spent Christmas Eve doing something I'd been putting off for months, cleaning out my filing cabinet. It sounds depressing, I know, spending Christmas Eve organizing paperwork, but actually it wasn't. There was something soothing about it, something meditative. The work was straightforward. You looked at a paper, decided if you needed it or not, and put it in the appropriate pile. No ambiguity. No hurt feelings. No phone calls that changed everything. I started with the top drawer, which was mostly current stuff, utility bills from the past year, bank statements, insurance documents. That drawer was easy, mostly just organizing what was already fairly organized. The second drawer was older paperwork, tax returns going back 10 years, which the internet had told me was how long you were supposed to keep them, though I'd kept them for longer just to be safe. Medical records from when Tom was sick, from the hospitals and the doctors, and the endless appointments that had filled those last 6 months. I'd kept all of it, every piece of paper, as if documentation could somehow make sense of what had happened, could somehow explain why a man who'd been healthy his whole life suddenly wasn't. I didn't throw those away. I couldn't, not yet. Maybe not ever. I just organized them into a folder and put them back. The bottom drawer was the oldest stuff. Ancient tax returns from the 80s and 90s. Warranty cards for appliances we'd thrown away a decade ago, a microwave, a washing machine, a television that had been state-of-the-art in 1995, instruction manuals for a VCR, for SDD player, for electronics that didn't even exist anymore. I made 3 piles: shred, recycle, keep. The shred pile grew steadily. Social security numbers on old documents, bank account numbers, anything with personal information that shouldn't just go in the trash. I'd have to take it to the office supply store where they had a shredding service. $5 for a pound of paper, which seemed expensive but was worth it for the peace of mind. In the very back of the bottom drawer, wedged behind a folder of old Christmas cards I'd saved for reasons I could no longer remember, I found a folder I'd forgotten about. It was labeled in Tom's handwriting, in the black marker he'd always used for filing things, Rob Business Docs. I pulled it out and sat on the floor of my den with it in my lap. The folder was thick, stuffed with papers. I opened it slowly. Inside were papers from when Rob first started his company 12 years ago. I remembered that time. Rob had been 31, passionate about his idea for a commercial landscaping service, convinced he could build something real, something lasting. He'd worked for other people's landscaping companies since high school, had learned the business from the ground up, and he had ideas about how to do it better, how to specialize in commercial properties, how to offer year-round maintenance contracts that would provide stable income even in the winter months. Tom had believed in him, but he'd also been practical. He'd told Rob that belief wasn't enough, that he needed a real business plan, real projections, real understanding of what he was getting into. And so they'd worked on it together, night after night at this very kitchen table, Tom helping Rob put together a plan that would convince a bank to take a chance on him. I looked through the documents now with older eyes, with more knowledge than I'd had then. There was the original loan paperwork from First National Bank, $50,000, which had seemed like such a huge amount at the time. Rob's signature on the borrower line, young and confident. And there, on the guarantor line, Tom's signature. Tom had co-signed. He'd put his name on the loan, his credit, his assets. He'd believed in our son enough to risk what we'd built. There were articles of incorporation filed with the state, business licenses, insurance documents, all the paperwork of starting something from nothing. And then, at the bottom of the folder, I found something I'd forgotten about completely. Another loan document, this one dated 4 years ago, 2 years after Tom died. This one was for $75,000, a business expansion loan from the same bank. And there, on the guarantor line, was my signature. I remembered it now, sitting on the floor with the paper in my hands. Rob had come over on a Tuesday afternoon. He'd seemed excited, energized in a way I hadn't seen since before Tom died. He told me the business was doing so well, better than he'd ever imagined. He had opportunities to expand, to take on bigger contracts, to hire more people. The bank wanted him to get a family co-signer, just as a formality, just to show he had backing. It wouldn't cost me anything, he'd assured me. The business was solid. The payments were covered. It was just a technicality. And I'd signed it because he was my son, because I wanted to support him, because I didn't really understand what I was signing anyway, and he'd assured me it was fine. I sat on that floor for a long time, just holding those papers. Then I got up, went to my computer, Tom's old desktop computer that I'd taught myself to use in the years after he died. Slowly, frustratingly, with help from YouTube videos and my granddaughter who was patient with me, and I looked up the business registry for our state. I found Rob's company, Porter Landscaping Services LLC. I clicked through to the current filings, the information that was public record. The business was listed as active. That was good. But when I searched for any associated court records, any legal actions, I found things that made my stomach drop. There were liens filed against the business, 3 of them, from different suppliers, for unpaid invoices. There were public notices about late payment disputes. And there was a lawsuit settled last year from a property owner claiming damages from work the company had done. The settlement amount was sealed, but the case existed. I printed everything I could find. Then I started searching for more information, using the skills I'd learned from that family tree research I'd done with my granddaughter 2 years ago. You'd be surprised what's public record if you know where to look. Tax liens, business licenses that had been temporarily suspended and then reinstated, notices of default that had been cured. My son's business wasn't failing, but it wasn't thriving either. It was struggling, had been struggling for what looked like at least 2 years, maybe longer. And he hadn't said a word to me. By midnight, I had a folder of my own, full of printouts and notes. I made myself a sandwich, turkey and cheese. Because I hadn't eaten since breakfast and my hands were shaking slightly, and I sat at the kitchen table and ate it while looking at the papers spread in front of me. I wasn't angry. I need you to understand that. Anger would have been cleaner, easier. This was something more complicated. It was a feeling like the ground falling away, like realizing that the story you'd been telling yourself about your life wasn't quite the story that was actually happening. It was the feeling of being peripheral, unnecessary, someone whose role was to sign papers and stay quiet and not ask questions. But underneath that, quieter, was something else. A clarity. A recognition. I was 74 years old, and I'd spent most of my life taking care of other people, supporting other people, putting other people first. And somewhere along the way, I'd become someone who could be dismissed with a cheerful phone call. Someone whose financial security could be put at risk without a real conversation. Someone who didn't even rate the truth. That was going to change. Not dramatically. Not with confrontation or ultimatums. But it was going to change. I cleaned up my sandwich plate, turned off the lights, and went to bed. And for the first time in a long time, I slept soundly, because at least now, I knew what I was dealing with. Uncertainty is harder to manage than hard truths. Christmas Day at Margaret's was exactly what I needed. Her daughter Linda was there with her family, her husband Mark, and their 2 teenagers. They folded me into their celebration without making me feel like a charity case, without asking too many questions about why I wasn't with my own family. We ate ham and scalloped potatoes, Margaret's traditional Christmas menu. We had green beans with almonds and dinner rolls that Linda had made from scratch. For dessert, there was pineapple and cherry, both store-bought, which Margaret apologized for even though no one cared. After dinner, we played cards at the kitchen table while the teenagers disappeared into the basement to play video games. We played Pinochle, which I hadn't played in years, and I was terrible at it, and everyone laughed when I made mistakes, but it was kind laughter, the kind that includes you rather than excludes you. At one point, Margaret squeezed my hand across the table and didn't say anything, and I squeezed back, and that was enough. That was all we needed. We'd been friends long enough to speak in squeezes and silence. Linda's husband Mark asked me about my house, about whether I was thinking of downsizing, and I could tell Margaret had mentioned something to them, had warned them that I was going through something, that they should be gentle. I appreciated it, even though I didn't need it. I like my house, I told Mark. I'm not ready to leave it yet. That's good, he said. Tom put a lot of work into that place. He did, I agreed. We talked about Tom for a while, about the work he'd done on the house over the years. The deck he'd built in the backyard. The bathroom he'd renovated. The garden beds he'd constructed from railroad ties that he'd bought from some guy selling them out of a truck in a parking lot. Mark had helped with the deck, I remembered. They'd spent a whole summer weekend on it, measuring and cutting and hammering, while Margaret and I sat in lawn chairs and provided cold drinks and commentary. It felt good to talk about Tom without it being sad. It had been long enough now that I could remember him without the remembering itself being painful. The missing him was still there, would always be there, but it wasn't sharp anymore. It was softer, more like a dull ache than a fresh wound. I drove home that evening through streets lit up with Christmas lights. The displays varied from house to house. Some people went all out with elaborate scenes, with reindeer and Santas and nativity sets. Some just had simple strings of lights along the roofline. Some had nothing at all, dark houses that made you wonder if anyone was home, or if they were celebrating somewhere else. I thought about that as I drove. About how you couldn't tell from the outside what was happening on the inside. That dark house might be full of people who just didn't care about decorations. That elaborate display might belong to someone desperately trying to create joy they didn't feel. You couldn't know. You could only see what people showed you. When I got home, I sat in my driveway for a minute before going in. My house had light, simple white ones along the roofline that Tom had installed years ago on a timer that still worked. I'd put a wreath on the door back in early December before everything changed. From the outside, it looked like Christmas. From the outside, it looked fine. I went inside, and the house was quiet and dark, except for the light I'd left on over the kitchen sink. I hung up my coat, put my purse on the counter, and stood in the middle of my kitchen feeling oddly peaceful. It had been a good day. Not the day I'd planned, not the day I'd wanted, but a good day nonetheless. And something in me had settled into a decision I hadn't quite made yet but knew was coming. The day after Christmas, I called my bank and asked to speak with someone about my accounts and any outstanding loans or guarantees. The person on the phone, a young man with a cheerful voice who wished me a Merry Christmas, said that I'd need to come in for something like that. They had an appointment available on December 30th at 10 in the morning. I took it. Rob called me that afternoon. I was in the living room, taking down the Christmas cards I'd displayed on the mantel. There weren't as many as there used to be. People didn't send cards the way they once did. Everything was online now. Quick messages and digital photos that appeared on your phone and then disappeared into the endless scroll of everything else. "Hey, Mom," Rob said when I answered. His voice was careful, testing. "How was your Christmas?" "Quiet. It was nice," I said. I pulled down a card from my cousin in Florida, a photo of her grandchildren on a beach. "I went to Margaret's." "Oh, good. Good. I'm glad you weren't alone." There was a pause. I didn't fill it. I've learned something over the years. Sometimes the most important thing you can do in a conversation is simply wait. "Listen," he said finally. "I just wanted to check in. Make sure you're doing okay." "I'm fine, honey." "Good. That's good." Another pause. "We'll get together next week, okay? After things settle down." "Sure," I said. "You're not upset, are you? About Christmas?" I could hear Jennifer in the background, her voice sharp, anxiety evident even though I couldn't make out the words. "Is that your mother?" "No, Rob," I said. I'm not upset. The relief in his voice was palpable. Okay, good. I was worried. Jennifer said you'd understand, but I wasn't sure. You know how it is. I didn't actually know how it was, but I said nothing. Anyway, love you, Mom. I'll call you next week. We'll set something up. He hung up before I could answer. That seemed to be a pattern lately. People saying goodbye before I could. I set the phone down and continued taking down the cards. I'd save them in a box in the closet, the way I always did. At some point, I'd have to go through those boxes, decades of Christmas cards piling up, but not today. Today, I just needed to put this Christmas away and get ready for whatever came next. On December 28th, I did something I hadn't done in years. I went to a movie by myself. It was a Tuesday afternoon, the theater was nearly empty, and I sat in the back row with a small popcorn and watched a drama about a woman who inherited a vineyard and had to decide whether to keep it or sell it. It wasn't a great movie, but it was absorbing enough, and for 2 hours I didn't think about Rob or Jennifer or guarantees or Christmas. When I came out, the late afternoon sun was already setting, that same flat gray light that had been outside my window when Jennifer called. But somehow it looked different now. Or maybe I looked at it differently. I stood in the parking lot for a moment, feeling the cold air on my face, watching my breath make clouds, and I thought, I can do this. Whatever this turns out to be, I can handle it. On December 30th, I got dressed carefully for my bank appointment. I wore the navy blue pantsuit I'd bought for Tom's funeral and had barely worn since. I put on the pearl earrings he'd given me for our 30th anniversary. I did my makeup, not elaborate, just enough to look put together, to look like someone who should be taken seriously. I arrived at the bank 10 minutes early and sat in the waiting area, watching people come and go. Young couples opening accounts, older men making deposits, a woman with 3 children who looked frazzled and exhausted. Everyone with their own financial lives, their own worries, their own versions of trying to keep it all together. At exactly 10 o'clock, a young woman came out and called my name. Mrs. Porter? I stood. Yes, I'm Melissa. I'll be helping you today. She led me to a small office, more of a cubicle really, with glass walls and a desk covered in neat stacks of papers. She couldn't have been more than 30, wearing a gray suit and a silver necklace. She had neat nails, painted pale pink, and a kind smile. How can I help you today? She asked once we were seated. I took a breath. I need to understand all the accounts and loans that are connected to my name, everything. I want a complete picture. Of course. She turned to her computer and began typing. Can I have your social security number? I recited it. She typed. The screen reflected in her glasses, numbers and lines scrolling past. Her smile faded gradually, replaced by something more serious, more concerned. Mrs. Porter, she said finally, looking up from the screen, are you aware that you're currently a guarantor on a business line of credit for Porter Landscaping Services? I am, I said. My voice was steady. Can you tell me the status of that account? She looked uncomfortable, the way people do when they have to deliver bad news. The account is currently in default. There have been missed payments for the past 4 months. The bank has sent multiple notices regarding the delinquency. I felt something cold settle in my stomach, but my voice remained calm. To what address? She checked. The notices are sent to the business address on file and to the primary account holder's personal address. Not to me? No, ma'am. As the guarantor, you would only be contacted once we begin collection proceedings. And have you begun collection proceedings? We're in the preliminary stages. The account is being reviewed by our collections department. She looked genuinely concerned now. Were you not aware of the situation? I'm aware now, I said. Can you tell me exactly how much is owed? She pulled up another screen. The current balance on the line of credit is $53,417. With late fees and interest, the amount continues to grow. $53,000. I let that number settle into my mind. It was more than I'd thought, less than I'd feared. I had that much in my savings, technically, but it represented most of what Tom had left me, most of what I lived on along with Social Security. Losing it would mean everything changing, selling the house, moving somewhere smaller, cheaper, simpler. It would mean the rest of my life looking very different than I'd planned. What happens next? I asked. Melissa explained it carefully, kindly. The bank would pursue collection. They would go after the business assets first: equipment, vehicles, accounts receivable. But if those weren't sufficient, which they likely wouldn't be based on what she was seeing in the account notes, they would pursue the guarantor, which was me. They could go after my savings account, which I had with this same bank. They could put a lien on my house. They could garnish my Social Security. They would do whatever was legal and necessary to recover the debt. Is there any way to negotiate? I asked. To set up a payment plan, something manageable? Potentially, she said. But you'd need to contact our collections department, and they'd need to see evidence of ability to pay, and a commitment from both you and the primary borrower. Is that something you'd like to explore? Yes, I said. But first, I need some time to understand the full situation. Can you print all of this for me? All the account details, the payment history, everything? She printed a thick stack of papers and put them in a folder for me. As she handed it across the desk, she said quietly, Mrs. Porter, I hope you don't mind me saying this, but you should probably consult with an attorney. This is a significant amount of debt, and you have rights. You don't have to just accept liability without exploring your options. Thank you, I said. I appreciate that. I left the bank with the folder under my arm and sat in my car for a long time before starting the engine. The numbers from those papers seemed to float in the air in front of me. $53,417. 4 months of missed payments. Notices sent that I'd never seen. A business in default. My son, struggling and never saying a word. I drove home slowly, carefully, hyper-aware of every turn, every stop sign. When you're processing something big, sometimes the safest thing you can do is force yourself to be present, to pay attention to the small, manageable task directly in front of you: driving, parking, walking to your door, unlocking it, going inside. One step, then another. Once inside, I made myself a cup of tea and sat at the kitchen table with that folder. I went through every page slowly, trying to understand the story they told. The line of credit had been opened 4 years ago, the same time I'd co-signed. For the first 2 years, payments had been made regularly, on time. Then, 2 years ago, there'd been a late payment. Just one, followed by several months of on-time payments. Then another late payment. Then 2 in a row. Then it got worse. Missed payments. Partial payments. The balance growing instead of shrinking as interest and late fees piled up. The business was dying. Had been dying for 2 years. And Rob had hidden it from everyone. I thought about all the times he'd called me over those 2 years. His voice always cheerful, always optimistic. Everything's great, Mom. Business is booming. We're hiring. We landed a huge contract. Always good news. Always forward momentum, always fine. It had all been a lie. Or not a lie exactly, but a performance. A story he was telling himself as much as me. A desperate attempt to will success into existence through sheer belief and denial. I picked up my phone and searched for attorneys. I'd only used a lawyer once, when Tom died and we needed to settle his will. Her name was Patricia Chen, and she'd been efficient and kind and had charged reasonable fees. I looked her up now and called her office. Chen Legal Services, a receptionist answered. Hello, my name is Eleanor Porter. I worked with Patricia about 7 years ago for an estate matter. I need to consult with her about a new issue. Is she available for an appointment? Let me check her calendar. A pause, keyboard sounds. She has an opening on January 3rd at 2 o'clock. Would that work? Yes, I said. That would be perfect. I hung up and felt a small sense of relief. I had a plan now, at least the beginning of one. Talk to Patricia. Understand my options. Make informed decisions instead of just reacting, just accepting whatever happened to me. New Year's Eve came and went quietly. I watched the ball drop on television with a glass of wine, a decent red I'd bought just for this occasion, and thought about how strange it was that I felt calmer than I had in months. You'd think facing potential financial ruin would make a person panic, would make sleep impossible, would fill every moment with anxiety. But sometimes I was learning, knowing the truth is less frightening than living in fog. Uncertainty is its own special kind of torture. At least now I knew what I was dealing with. At least now I could take action instead of just drifting along, pretending everything was fine. As midnight approached and the crowd on TV counted down, I raised my glass to the empty room. To truth, I said out loud. To clarity. To whatever comes next. The new year arrived. The crowd on TV cheered. Confetti fell. And I sat in my quiet house and felt oddly hopeful. On January 2nd, I drove to Rob's office. I'd been there maybe twice before, both times just dropping something off, a lunch he'd forgotten, some documents he needed. I'd never gone inside properly, never seen where he actually worked, where his business operated. The office was in a small commercial complex on the east side of town, tucked between a sandwich shop and a print store. The parking lot was mostly empty on this Friday afternoon. I parked and sat for a moment, gathering my thoughts, deciding how to approach this. Finally, I got out and walked to the door. A small sign read, Porter Landscaping Services, Main Office. Through the glass, I could see a reception area, a desk, a young woman sitting behind it, looking at her phone. I went in. The receptionist looked up, startled, as if she wasn't used to walk-in visitors. She was young, maybe mid-20s, with tired eyes and hair pulled back in a messy ponytail. "Can I help you?" she asked. "I'm here to see Rob Porter," I said. "I'm his mother." Her expression shifted, something that might have been pity crossing her face. "Let me see if he's available." She picked up her phone and pressed a button. "Rob, your mom is here." A pause. "Yes, your mother." Another pause. "Okay." She hung up and looked at me. "He'll be right out." I stood in the reception area and looked around. There were framed photos on the walls, commercial properties, landscaped grounds, before and after shots. A filing cabinet in the corner. A water cooler with the empty bottle still on top. The carpet was worn in places, stained in others. Everything had the feel of a business that had once been cared for, but was now just barely maintained, kept functional but not thriving. Rob emerged from a back hallway, and I was struck by how exhausted he looked. He'd lost weight not in a healthy way, but in the way of someone who forgets to eat, who's too stressed to have an appetite. There were shadows under his eyes, dark half-moons that makeup couldn't hide, even if he'd thought to use it. His shirt was wrinkled. His hair needed cutting. "Mom, what are you doing here?" His voice held surprise and something else. Wariness, maybe, or fear. "Can we talk in your office?" He glanced at the receptionist, then nodded. "Sure, yeah, come on back." I followed him down a narrow hallway, past a small break room where I glimpsed a table covered in coffee cups and food wrappers, past a storage closet with its door half open, revealing stacks of boxes and supplies. His office was at the end of the hall, and when he opened the door, I saw what his business had become. The office was small and cluttered with papers everywhere stacked on his desk, piled on chairs, covering most of the floor space. There were coffee rings on every surface. A dead plant sat on the windowsill. The whole room had the feel of someone drowning, someone overwhelmed by details too numerous to manage. "Sorry about the mess," he said, moving a stack of folders off a chair so I could sit. "It's been crazy busy." I sat down, setting my purse in my lap. Rob sat behind his desk, and I watched him arrange his face into something that was supposed to look calm, capable, in control. But I'd known this man his whole life. I'd nursed him through chickenpox and taught him to ride a bike and sat up with him when he had nightmares. I could read him better than he could read himself. "What's going on?" he asked, trying for casual and missing by a mile. "I need you to tell me the truth about the business, Rob, about the loans, about the money." All the color drained from his face. "Mom, it's complicated. I have time." He sat very still for a moment, his hands flat on his desk. Then his shoulders sagged, and something in him seemed to collapse inward. "How did you find out?" "I went to the bank. I looked at the public records. I educated myself." I kept my voice gentle but firm. 4 months of missed payments, liens, a default notice. And I'm on the hook for all of it because I guaranteed that loan 4 years ago. The loan you told me was just a formality. "Mom, he stopped, swallowed hard. "I thought I could fix it. I really did. I kept thinking if I could just land one more big contract, if I could just make it through one more season, everything would turn around." "How long has it been bad?" He looked down. 2 years. Maybe more. It's hard to say exactly when it started. Things were tight, and then they got tighter, and then suddenly I was juggling debt, trying to pay one bill with money meant for another. You know that saying about robbing Peter to pay Paul? I know it. That's been my life for 2 years. His voice cracked. Every single day I wake up and play this game of which crisis is most urgent, which bill absolutely has to be paid today, or we shut down. Do I pay the insurance so we can keep operating, or do I pay the supplier so we have materials for the job we're starting Monday? Do I make payroll, or do I make the loan payment? I can't do both. I can never do both. Why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you tell anyone?" He looked up then, and his eyes were red-rimmed, exhausted. "Tell you what? That I was failing? That everything Dad helped me build, everything he believed I could do, was falling apart? You already lost him, Mom. I couldn't make you watch me lose this too. I couldn't disappoint you like that. So you just let me guarantee a loan without explaining the risk? Without giving me any warning that I might lose everything?" "That was 4 years ago," he said. "Things were better then. I really thought I'd turn it around. The expansion made sense at the time. We were growing, we needed equipment, we needed to capitalize on the momentum. I wasn't lying to you. I genuinely believed it would work out. And at Christmas, when you asked me not to come, he closed his eyes. That was Jennifer's idea, but I went along with it. She's been so stressed, Mom. She knows how bad things are. I couldn't hide it from her anymore. We've been fighting constantly. About money, about the business, about what we're going to do if it all falls apart. She said she couldn't handle putting on a show for the holidays, couldn't pretend everything was fine in front of you and the kids. She said it would be easier if you just weren't there. And you agreed? I was so tired. Mom, I'm still so tired. He looked at me directly then. Really looked at me for the first time since I'd arrived. I didn't know what else to do. Every day is a battle just to keep going. Every decision feels impossible. And Jennifer was at her breaking point, and the kids could feel the tension, and I just thought, maybe if we have one quiet holiday, just us, maybe we can regroup. Maybe we can face things in the new year with fresh energy. But you didn't tell me any of that. You just dismissed me, I know. His voice was barely above a whisper. I drove to Rob and Jennifer's house through streets lined with lights, and when I pulled into their driveway, the front door opened immediately. The grandchildren spilled out, running to meet me even though it was cold and they weren't wearing coats. They surrounded me, hugging my waist, grabbing my hands, all of them talking at once about Santa and presents and the cookies they'd made, and could they have one of mine right now, please? Rob appeared in the doorway, backlit by the warm glow of the house. Jennifer stood beside him, one hand resting on her still flat stomach, protecting the baby none of the children knew about yet. They were smiling, waiting for me. I gathered up my purse and a tin of cookies, and Emma grabbed my other hand, tugging me forward. Come on, Grandma. We've been waiting for you. I let her pull me toward that open door, toward that light, toward my family. Not because I needed them to be whole. I'd learned over this past year that I was already whole on my own, but because I wanted to share my wholeness with them, and they wanted to share theirs with me. That's what family is, in the end. Not obligation. Not duty. Not the pretense that everything is fine when it isn't. But choice. Choosing each other, again and again, even after hurt, even after failure, as long as there's honesty and effort and love. Real love. The kind that holds people accountable and sets boundaries and tells the truth, even when the truth is uncomfortable. I stepped into the warmth, into the noise, into Christmas. And it felt like coming home. Not to a place I'd lost, but to a place I'd rebuilt, stronger and truer than before. Well, my dears, that's my story. 1 year from the Christmas I wasn't wanted to the Christmas I chose to attend. And all the learning and growing and changing that happened in between. I hope something in it resonated with you. Maybe you faced something similar, being dismissed by family, having your trust broken, discovering that love sometimes means setting boundaries instead of just accepting everything. Or maybe you're facing it now, standing in your own kitchen trying to figure out how to move forward when the ground has shifted under your feet. If you are, I want you to know, you're stronger than you think. You're worth more than you've been told. And it's never too late to stand up for yourself while still keeping your heart open. It's never too late to learn something new, to make new friends, to rebuild your life in a shape that honors who you actually are instead of who everyone else needs you to be. Forgiveness doesn't mean pretending you weren't hurt. Healing doesn't mean going back to the way things were. Sometimes the healthiest thing you can do is acknowledge that something broke, and then decide consciously whether to repair it, and if so, how. And it's okay if the repaired version looks different than the original. Sometimes different is better. Sometimes breaking is how we learn what's actually strong enough to last. If you enjoyed this story, I'd be grateful if you'd hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. Leave a comment and let me know where you're listening from. I love hearing from people all over the world, knowing that these stories reach you wherever you are. And if these stories mean something to you, if they help you feel less alone, or give you courage to face your own difficult situations, consider supporting the channel. It helps me keep sharing these stories with all of you. Take care of yourselves, my dears. Be kind to yourselves. Remember that you deserve respect, even from the people you love, especially from the people you love. And remember, grace doesn't mean letting people hurt you over and over. It means healing together, honestly, with courage and boundaries and truth. Until next time.